Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome dear learners. The video is for the subject of Geography for the course of Bachelor's in Arts with Geography or Bachelor's in Arts with Honours in Geography. The video is for the paper of Climatology. We are discussing Koppens Climate Classification, and this particular lecture 1B is a continuation lecture on Koppens Climate Classification. The video is being recorded by Dr. Pallavi Upreti. The course coordinator and presenter for the video is Dr. Pallavi Upreti, affiliated to Department of Geography, Doon University. The academic expert and reviewer for the video is Professor Santosh Verma, Head of the Department, Department of Geography, SDM PG, Government Degree College, Doiwala, Dehradun, affiliated to Shri Dev Suman, Uttarakhand University. The video is produced and presented under the project name DTH Swayam Prabha Channels of MHRD, New Delhi, India. In the last video, we've already discussed the A and B type of climate of Koppen's scheme. A is tropical humid climate. We have discussed the subcategories also, which are tropical wet climate, AF type of climate, AM type of climate, which is tropical monsoon type of climate, AW type of climate, which is tropical wet and dry type of climate or savanna type of climate. Similarly, we have also discussed the broad category B, which is the dry climate. And we've also discussed the subcategory where BS stands for semi-arid type of climate and BW stands for arid or desert type of climate. And here we have also learned about the third categorization or subcategorization of BS and BW categories also into BSH and BSK, which is mid-latitudinal steppe climate and subtropical steppe climate, whereas the BW category was further divided into BWH, which represents subtropical desert climate, and BWK, which represent mid-latitudinal desert climate or the cold desert type of climate. So we have already discussed the A and B type of categories in our previous slide. Today we are going to start with the C type of climate, which is the warm, temperate, mid-latitudinal climate. So before going into C type of climate, I also want to show you that in certain categories, Koppen has presented the third subdivision also for each. For example, in C type category, you have a third categorization also where small a stands for hot in summer, B stands for warm summer, and C stands for cold summer type of climate, because in mid latitudes, as we progress from the equator towards the poles, the climate conditions become much more complex. You have much more added regional variations also in the C and D type of climate. Therefore, for C and D type of climate, third category of division is also preferred in various areas. So let's see now what are the characteristics of C type of climate. Now C type of climate represents humid mesothermal climate or warm moist subtropical mid-latitudinal climate. So as you know that subtropical region extends beyond 20-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. So this type of climate is predominant in the subtropical regions of the world. And these subtropical regions of the world generally extend between 20 to 50-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. But the true characteristics of these type of climate generally extends between 30 to 50-degree latitudes, because beyond 50 degree there is much more effect of temperate latitudes also which is being felt in these regions, and beyond 30 degree towards equator a very predominant impact of tropical type of climate is also felt towards its southern margins. So these type of climate best extend between 30 to 50-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere, and they are mostly found along the eastern and western borders of the continents along the southernmost zone of the temperate regions. So southernmost zone of the temperate regions generally start after 50-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. So just at the margins of temperate and tropical latitudes, you have this particular belt of subtropical mid-latitudinal type of climate. So it is kind of a transition zone between the warm tropical areas and the cool temperate regions of the world. So it represents the transition type of climate. The average temperature of the coldest month is above 3 degree but below 13 degrees. So the range of temperature is between 3 degree Celsius during the winter months and 13 degrees Celsius between the summertime period. So it is a very moderate kind of climate, as you can see that it ranges between 3 degrees in winters to 13 degrees in summers, and there is precipitation throughout the year. These regions generally receive precipitation which is mostly cyclonic in nature also, especially during the winter season because of the mid-latitudinal cyclonic activity and extension of the frontal cyclonic activity also sometimes. So because of pressure induced cyclonic conditions in these particular areas, they receive almost rainfall throughout the year. So these particular regions of the world, the southeastern corner of USA, the southeastern corner of South America, the southeastern corner of South Africa, southeastern corner of South Australia, and the eastern region of Asia extending from Indo-China Peninsula to the southern parts of China, you have dominant impact of this particular climate which is felt in the eastern regions of the world. Similarly, along the western regions of the world, this particular climate is quite predominant. Here you can see that in the entire subtropical mid-latitudinal region, the sea type of climate is quite prevalent. Now, even in the subtropical mid-latitudinal regions, the sea type of climate has different variations as you move from the equator towards the polar regions, or as you move from the eastern continental margins towards the western continental margins. So based on seasonal distribution of precipitation, again because this is the secondary classification and the tertiary classification, so the sea type of climate is further divided into CF type of climate, CW type of climate, and CS type of climate broadly. CF type of climate, as the name suggests, C means subtropical and F means regions receiving precipitation throughout the year. So warm subtropical regions which receive precipitation throughout the year comes in category of CF type of climate. So you have subtropical areas along the eastern coast of the continents also which receive rainfall throughout the year, and you have the regions which receive rainfall throughout the year along the western coast of continents also. Based on that, again the CF type of climate is further divided into CFA, which stands for humid subtropical climate, and in these particular regions you have warm climate, but these areas also receive rainfall throughout the year and they are located in subtropical regions. So CFA, humid subtropical climate, and this type of climate is prevalent along the eastern coastal margins of the continent, particularly extending between 20 to 40 degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. So naturally the summers will be having hot humid summers and mild winters. Heavy rainfall is experienced in these regions, specifically in summer season, and in winter season these areas also receive rainfall, particularly due to intense hurricane and cyclonic activity in these subtropical areas, especially along the eastern coast of USA, eastern coast of China and southern Australia. Because these regions receive rainfall throughout the year, they have evergreen forest, palm trees, shrubs type of vegetation. Another variant of CF type of climate which is found along the western margins is CFB. So it is marine west coast climate. So So it is found immediately poleward of the Mediterranean type of climate. So we will just see what Mediterranean type of climate here later on. But you have to understand that these type of climates are found along the western margins, and they extend between 40 to 60 degree north latitude in both the hemisphere, and they primarily receive rainfall throughout the year, mainly because of onshore westerlies, because westerlies bring rainfall, moisture laden winds throughout the year to these regions, because of which they become humid with very short to no dry season. Heavy precipitation is experienced during the mild winter season due to continuous presence of mid-latitudinal cyclones in these regions and onshore westerlies throughout the year. The other category is CW type of climate, which W is winter dry. So these regions do not receive rainfall during the winter season, and most of the precipitation is concentrated in 5 to 7 months during the summer season. And this is predominant in mid-latitudinal eastern continental margins of Asia, especially along China, along the eastern margins, and it has distinctive winter dry season with summer concentration of rainfall. So you can say that as you move from equator towards the poles, the monsoon type of climate which you experience across India, Indonesia, across Indian subcontinent. So when you move towards the northern limits, the monsoon type of climate get modified into CW or warm temperate climate with winter dry season. So these areas also receive the summer concentration of rainfall just like the monsoon type of climate, but they are located towards much northern limits, towards the middle latitudinal areas. So they are kind of modified version of monsoon type of climate only. Besides this, the third category in which the C type of climate is divided is CS type of climate. So these type of climates are predominant in mid-latitudinal western continental margins between 30 to 45 degree north and south latitudes in both the hemisphere, but they are extensively developed over the northern European regions around the Mediterranean Sea. So this type of climate is also called as Mediterranean type of climate because it is best developed along the Mediterranean region of Europe. So what is the main characteristic of CS type of climate is that it has a distinctive summer dry season. So it does not receive rainfall during the summer season. It receives maximum rainfall during winters due to onshore westerlies. So we have already covered in module 3 how the pressure belts, they migrate from the northern hemisphere from north to south, and with the apparent movement of the pressure belts, the wind pattern also changes, which results into the winter rainfall, and these areas are located in those transition zones where the pressure belt migrate. So these areas during the winter season receive rainfall from the onshore westerlies, whereas during the summer season, when the belt shifts to their original position, they have offshore trade winds, so they don't receive rainfall during the summer season because of offshore trade winds with the movement of the pressure belt. So it is Mediterranean type of climate. Just above this Mediterranean type of climate along the western coast of continents, you have CFB type of climate. So let's see the distribution of C type of climate on map. Let's look into the global distribution of C type of climate. As we have studied in the earlier slide, the C type of climate prominently extends between 20 to 50 degree latitude in both the hemisphere, and this particular area different variants of C type of climate also. For example, the CFA type of climate, which is the humid subtropical climate, it is experienced along the eastern part of the continent, prominently along the southeastern coastal region of USA, southeastern coastal region of China, and parts of Indochina Peninsula. And then you have CFA type of climate in the southeastern region of South America, southeastern parts along the South Africa around Madagascar will also have CFA type of climate, and then the southeastern region of Australia along with certain northern parts of New Zealand also will experience the CFA type of climate. Besides this, CFB type of climate is experienced along the western margins. Therefore, it is also called as marine west coast climate. And this type of climate is best developed around the island of Britain, UK, and certain parts of Western Europe. So this is sometimes also called as British type of climate. So you can see parts of Europe and UK experiencing this climate, and then in the southern hemisphere in South America, southern Chile region also experience CFB type of climate or British type of climate. And you don't have the British type of climate in South Africa, okay, because you don't have that extension of landmass to these higher limits so that British type of climate can be experienced. And southeastern tip of Australia around Tasmania and southern tip of Australia experience this type of climate along with the southern parts of New Zealand also. So these two regions experience the CFB type of climate. So regions experiencing CFB type of climate generally have onshore westerlies throughout the year. Therefore, they receive fair amount of rainfall throughout the year, and hence the F that stands for rainfall throughout the year. Okay, because of which these regions also support evergreen type of vegetation. Now coming to another variant of C type of climate, it is CS type of climate, and as S stands for summer dry. So these regions experience rainfall prominently during the winter season, and the summer season is mostly dry. So why these experience rainfall prominently during the winter season? As we've already discussed, because these areas represent transition zones which develop due to the shifting of pressure belts, while throughout the year these regions have offshore trade winds. Offshore trade winds, particularly during the summer season, but because of shifting of pressure belts, okay, during the winter season, because of the shifting of pressure belts, these areas come under the onshore westerlies and hence experience the rainfall during the winter season. So the western parts of continents located equatorward to CFB type of climate experience CS type of climate or Mediterranean type of climate. And this type of climate is best developed around the Mediterranean region, and therefore it is also called as Mediterranean type of climate. So CS type of climate. Okay, and this CS type of climate is therefore localized to certain areas of the world only which experience shifting of pressure belts and experience onshore westerlies during the winter time period. So similar to northern hemisphere, you also have pockets of CS type of climate just located towards the equatorward margins of the British type of climate. Okay, so CFB type of climate is British and CS type of climate is Mediterranean type of climate. So you have Mediterranean type of climate around the pockets of Chile, around pockets of southwestern Africa, pockets of southwestern Australia, pockets of Western Canada, and the entire region surrounding the Mediterranean Sea in Europe. Besides these three, you also have a small variant of CW type of climate. Okay, and this CW type of climate represents winter dry. That is, most of the rainfall or precipitation is experienced during the summer season. And this type of climate is best developed around China. Therefore, it is also called as China type of climate. Okay, so China type of climate experiences rainfall particularly during the 5 to 7 months in the summer season. So it is kind of an extension of monsoon type of climate around the eastern coastal region of China. because definitely in monsoons also you experience the maximum precipitation during the summer season, but monsoon type of climate does not experience very distinctive winter dry, whereas the China type of climate experiences the specific winter dry season. Okay, so the modified version of trade winds provide precipitation to these areas, especially during the summer season. So these are the four variants of C type of climate which are experienced between 20 to 50-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. And the most important among all of these is the Mediterranean type of climate, because it represents a very unique type of climate developed due to the shifting of pressure belts. So these transition zones of Mediterranean type of climate towards the equatorward margins have shrubs, stunted trees, while along the poleward margins you have evergreen type of forest along with deciduous type of vegetation. So evergreen type of forest are found along the poleward margins of the Mediterranean type of climate in the British type of climate, or CFB type of climate. And these Mediterranean regions of the world are also best for the cultivation of fruits, specifically the citrus fruits. So extensive vineyards, grape cultivation, orange cultivation can be seen in these areas. For example, California is famous for its sun-kissed oranges, orchards, and extensive fruit cultivation, specifically the citrus fruit cultivation, thrives very well in these type of climates which experience winter rainfall. So you have Mediterranean type of climate which supports the fruit cultivation, specifically the citrus fruit cultivation. So this was all about the distribution of C type of climate. Now let's move on to D type of climate, also called as cold snow forest type of climate. And the two variants of D type of climate which we will discuss are humid continental type of climate, DF, and subarctic type of climate, that is DW. What are the prominent characteristics of D type of climate? These areas corresponds to humid microthermal or humid cold climate or cold snow forest climate. So these are the names of the same type of climate. Besides moist continental mid-latitudinal climate, D type of climate are also known as humid cold climate or cold snow forest climate. And these areas have microthermal kind of vegetation. And D type of climate extends prominently between 50 to 70-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. The main characteristics of these particular type of climatic regions is that they prominently exist in large continental interiors of northern hemisphere extending between 40 to 70-degree latitude. Why northern hemisphere? Because in these particular latitudes, in temperate latitudes, the land area in southern hemisphere is almost negligible. So on land, this type of climate is experienced prominently in the northern hemisphere. So the temperature of the coldest month goes below -3 degrees Celsius and the warmest month temperature goes above 10 degrees Celsius. So the range of temperature is high here, which extends almost from -3 degrees Celsius approximately to 10 degrees Celsius between winters and summers respectively. Cool summers are experienced in these regions with severe winters with snowstorms. Why snowstorms are experienced in these regions? As you remember that these areas are also regions of extensive frontal activity. Okay, fronts are formed in these regions because of distinctive air masses. So very cold, chilly air masses, they come from the northern polar regions and they collide with the warm air masses coming from the equatorial regions, because of which these areas experience very dynamic climatic conditions with extensive frontal cyclone formation also in these areas. So you have severe winters because cold, chilly air masses coming from the northern polar regions bring snowstorms along with them, and heavy blizzards can be seen in the winter season in these areas, and ground is covered completely with snow for several months of the year. And this particular condition worsens in the continental interior areas, which become very, very cold. So the polar or continental Arctic air masses, they kind of stabilize themselves over the continental interiors, making the cold conditions very, very severe in these areas. And in the southern hemisphere, there is no land, so these conditions are not experienced in these areas. So D type of climate is most prominently observed in the northern hemisphere between 50 to 70 degree latitudes, prominently in the northern hemisphere. The D climate is further divided into DF and DW type of climate, and F, as you know, that is precipitation throughout the year. So either in form of rainfall or in form of snow, the precipitation in these areas is experienced throughout the year. So you have long winters and moderate to high annual precipitation is experienced in these areas, with practically no dry season between the 40 to 70 degree latitudes in the northern hemisphere specifically. And these areas are dominated by coniferous forests because they receive rainfall throughout the year, or boreal forest or taiga biome. So you have extensive coniferous forest which can be seen in these areas. So as you can see in this world map, that D type of climate is prominently experienced in the northern hemisphere. And the D type of climate is further divided into DFA, that is long warm summer continental type of climate, and DFB, long cool summer continental type of climate. But both these type of climates are found in the northern hemisphere specifically and not found in the southern hemisphere because of non-existence of land in these latitudes in the southern hemisphere. And D type of climate is further divided into DFC, which is subarctic or boreal climate. So as you move from the equator towards the polar regions, you can see that D type of climate transitions into DFA. So towards the equatorward you will have DFA, then it will transitions to DFB, and then gradually transitions to DFC, and finally towards the polar ends the DF type of climate will transition into DFD with increasing severity of cold. So DFA will have less cold as compared to DFB, and as you move from DFA to DFD, the severity of cold conditions will increase. So DFD will have practically subarctic type of climate with very severe winters, 8 to 9 months of snow covered region, and it is located poleward to DFC. So DFA is more equatorward and DFD is more poleward. And DFD type of climate is peculiar to the eastern Siberian region, where extensive continental interior and vast expanses of land can be seen in these areas, making winters very severe. So DFC type of climate kind of transitions to DFD type of climate in these areas. Now another category of D type of climate is DW type of climate, which are again humid cold type of climate but with winter dry season, that there is no precipitation during the winter season, and winters are practically very cold, dominated by cold, dry, chilly winds blowing in the region. So this practically shows the subarctic region with very severe winters. Further, so it is kind of a transition of DFD type of climate moving poleward. So as you move poleward, the DFD type of climate transitions into DW type of climate with more severe winter type of conditions, where the temperature of the coldest month goes below -38 degrees Celsius in winters, and winters are very cold with dry chilly winds blowing over the entire region. And this particular type of climate is kind of symbolic to Siberia, which is the northern part of Russia, and it is very cold, and to the northern part of Canada, northern Europe, northern limits of Norway and Sweden region of Europe. And this area corresponds to taiga or coniferous forest. So for most of the part of the year, the taiga and coniferous forest region is also entirely covered with snow. So these are the variants of D or moist continental mid-latitudinal type of climate, which is prominently found in the temperate regions of the world towards the polar margins. And the main characteristics of D type of climate is that they are found along the continental interiors because of very severe cold conditions which developed along the interior continental regions between 50 to 70 degree latitudes, mainly in the northern hemisphere. So let's see what is the distribution of D type of climate. So as you can see here that the D type of climate is prominently found along the polar margins of C type of climate in the temperate latitudes, which extend from 50 to 70 degree latitudes, mainly in the northern hemisphere, and only the little bit tip of southern hemisphere along the polewards limit of Argentina and Chile experience this type of climate in the southern hemisphere. But northern hemisphere, you can see the entire northern part of Canada, entire northern part of Europe, and entire Russia Siberia region is covered under this type of climate. So central and eastern Siberia region, North Canada, Northern Europe, Russia, Northern China, Mongolia, etc. are the regions which are dominated by D type of climate, and these particular areas also have coniferous type of vegetation. High precipitation is experienced in these areas, but as you move towards the poles, the precipitation is more in form of snow. So you can see here that this is DFA type of climate, and as you move towards the poles, the DFA type of climate transitions into DFD type of climate and DW type of climate in certain areas also. So this is DW type of climate, which is the characteristics of eastern Siberian region only. So DFA type of climate is found more along the equatorward end, while the DFD type of climate and DW type of climate is found more towards the polar margins. And the high precipitation in these areas is mainly due to the convergence of continental air mass with the tropical air mass, leading to precipitation along the equatorward margin of these areas, while the poleward margins are mainly deprived of any kind of precipitation, especially during the winter time period, which is dominated by cold, chilly winds coming from the northern polar regions, which dominate the entire area during the winter time period. So this is the D type of climate. The last region of Koppen climatic scheme is the E type of climate, which corresponds to cold climate of the polar areas, and it is further divided into tundra type of climate, which is represented by ET, and polar ice caps, which is represented by EF type of climate. We will talk about the H category later on in this particular slide, because when Koppen gave the classification of E, which resembles the cold climates, he was not able to differentiate between the cold climates of the polar areas and the cold climates which are found in the lower latitudes or snow-clad regions of the lower latitudes. For example, the snow-clad areas of the Himalaya. But in order to distinguish between the cold areas of the polar regions and the cold areas due to elevation even in the lower latitudes, another category was created much later on during the revision phase of Koppen's classification. So H resembles to highland type of climate, but in his initial original categorization, the H type of climate is non-existent. Only the first 5 type of climatic regions A, B, C, D and E were talked about, and H type of climate was later on added during subsequent revisions of the Koppen's classification. So let's see now what E type of climate is and what are its major characteristics. Now let's look at the major characteristics of E type of climate or cold polar climate. So initially E represented the cold climates of the higher latitudes. Later on, H category was added to showcase the cold climates of the highlands with snow cover in the areas other than the polar latitudes. So we'll discuss about the H category later on. Let's look into the major characteristics of E type of climate. These areas are located along the polar regions extending beyond the 70-degree latitudes in both the hemispheres. And these areas are extremely cold climates with temperature of the warmest month also below 10 degree Celsius. So even the temperature of the warmest month is below 10 degrees Celsius with no rainfall, and whatever precipitation is experienced is mostly in the form of snow. These areas are completely covered with snow and the soil is practically in permafrost state. Ground is covered with snow whole year round with short summer season in some regions of the world. And because of absence of liquid water in these regions and the conditions of permafrost and total cover of snow, these areas are practically barren, supporting very low vegetation such as mosses, lichens, herbs, and small shrubs which grow for very short time period during the summer season. So main characteristics of E type of climate is that these are the climate of the polar areas which are totally covered with snow throughout the year. And in the southern hemisphere, you have Antarctica region, which is completely under snow for the whole year. The E type of climate is further divided into two subtypes, ET and EF. ET type of climate denotes the tundra type of climate, which is a treeless region found in the Arctic north of 70-degree north latitude. And the warmest month has an average temperature between 0 to 10 degree Celsius. So the average range of temperature is between 0 to 10 degree Celsius. Climate is cold and windy and rainfall is scanty in these areas. Therefore, ET type of special category to represent this type of climate is created under the E type of climate. Tundra lands are covered with snow for much of the year, but summers bring burst of white flowers. So burst of small vegetation takes place in these areas with dwarf shrubs, sedges, grasses, mosses and lichens which grow during the melting of snow. Scatters trees can also be found in these tundra regions where moisture in soil is available. Besides ET, the E type of climate is also divided into EF category, which represents polar ice cap. This means that these particular areas are completely covered under ice for the entire year, and there is practically no time period of the year when the snow melts off. So these areas are completely under ice whole year round. This climate is dominant in Antarctica, inner Greenland, and summits of many high mountains even at lower latitudes. So these areas have permanent snowfield regions and the monthly average temperature is always below 0 degrees Celsius. So they are always covered under ice. EF type of climate is not only representative of polar areas, but it also represents the snow-covered mountain summits even at the lower latitudes. So initially it was very difficult to distinguish between the snow-covered areas of lower latitudes and the polar ice caps which are found in the polar areas. So a separate category in later on revisions was formed to showcase the areas which have permanent ice cover, but they are found not in the polar areas but other than polar areas. So later on, this particular capital letter H category was added to the Koppens classification and it was modified to distinguish the climate of snow-covered mountains in regions other than Arctic and Antarctic areas. But these particular areas have similar climatic characteristics, although they were located in the lower latitudes. So snow-covered areas of the Himalayas, of Andes, European Alps region, Rockies region, which were different from the polar areas ice cap regions. So H represented the highland type of climate or snow-covered areas of the lower latitudes other than the polar areas. Now let's look at the distribution of E type of climate. E type of climate is generally found in the areas which extend beyond 70-degree latitudes in both the hemisphere. So ET type of variant of E climate occurs along the northern edges of North American continent and Eurasian landmass, generally beyond 70-degree north latitudes. So in the northern parts of Canada, this type of climate is there. Outer edges of Greenland, you can see this type of climate is there. Parts of Siberia also have ET type of climate, and this type of climate in the earlier original scheme of Koppen also included the highland regions of the world, which were located in the lower latitudes, just like in the Himalayan belt, parts of Andes, parts of Alps in Europe also. Besides this, EF type of climate includes the total snow-covered area, which was in northern Canada, Greenland, and Antarctica. So here in the map, you can see that's the northern part of Canada, which is totally under snow, central Greenland region, which is also totally snow-covered, formed part of this particular EF type of climate. And certain pockets in northern Siberia region are totally snow-covered. Whereas in the southern hemisphere, the entire Antarctic continent is under EF type of climate. Besides this, EF type of climate also includes the snow-covered summits of many high mountains in the lower latitudes. So this particular category of the highland regions of lower latitude also come under ET and EF. But later on in the subsequent revisions of the Koppen scheme to represent the cold highland regions of the world in the lower latitudes and the snow-covered summits of the mountain in the lower latitude, a distinctive separate category was created, which was denoted with the capital letter H, which demarcated the highland type of climate or the snow-covered areas of the lower latitudes which were not part of the polar areas. So in the initial original scheme of Koppen, you only had A, B, C, D and E type of climate. And E type of climate essentially demarcated the cold climate without distinguishing the cold climate of the polar areas and the cold highland type of climate of the lower latitudes. So later on in the subsequent revisions, besides these 5 categories, one another category was added, which was in form of H type of climate, denoting the highland type of climate. So all the highland regions, cold highland regions of the world of the lower latitudes and the snow-covered summits of the mountains of the lower latitudes came under the highland category. So it included the cold highland regions of Andes, Central European region, Central Asian region with Himalayan mountain range. They were all part of H or highland type of climate.
So we have discussed all the major climate types under the open scheme of climate classification. We have already discussed what is A type of climate, which is a tropical humid climate, B type of climate, which is dry climate, C climate, which is warm, temperate, mid-latitudinal climate, and D climate is related to cold snow forest type of climate, while E climate is associated with cold climates. Beside this, we have also discussed the H type of climate, which is the highland type of climate, and other features which are related to Koppen scheme of climate classification will be discussed in 1C video lecture, which is next in the series.